Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A couple of weeks ago, I guess months ago now, I had the privilege of talking with folks from Agriculture Financial Services Corporation in Alberta, who are thinking about sort of, as a thought experiment now, but it might become practical down the road, adjusting crop insurance premiums based on levels of soil organic carbon, so that you would have an absolute price incentive built in, and you would be indemnifying the insurance sellers by reducing premiums for people who are farming on soil with high organic carbon and encouraging them to enrich that soil. So I wondered, for both Ms. Riekman and Mr. Wallace, what you think of that idea of using insurance as one way of encouraging new farming techniques and minimizing risk to provinces.
Yes. Yeah, it takes a complete shift. It's a complete shift in how we've done business before in order to look at things in that way. I think insurance is one of those places where we can definitely look at how farmers then, based on a change in how crop insurance is managed, then may look at how they could change cropping decisions. We already use soil-based information in terms of figuring out what the crop insurance kind of coverage is for certain areas based on productivity. That takes the soil data into account as well as climate data for the area. But I think looking at it as at a broader picture is definitely important. One of the number one things that I'll often hear from farmers when we talk about doing these types of projects is a comment like, I pay taxes on that land. And because I pay taxes on that land, I need to make money on that land. But then sometimes we have to step back and look at, well, you can pay taxes on that land and make money off of it, but you might be losing more by trying to crop it than you're actually gaining. And it takes a mind shift, again, the behavioral stuff we've talked about earlier. But I think if the system changes in terms of being able to where we put the influence, I guess, and the importance on how we manage it. Right now, farmers are dealing with crop insurance, and taxation and all of that kind of stuff as being the driver for how they're making cropping decisions. But if we change that, then that could then have an influence on behavioral changes too. It's a big thing, and I'm quite impressed that Alberta is looking at that as a pilot.
Mr. Wallace.
Well, I think with insurance, there's a couple of options, and I completely agree it can be a tool to help. And one of them is the business risk management insurance that helps protect if I do make changes, that there's some kind of backstop that's going to support me if there's losses with or because of those changes. So that's one of them. Now, the suggestion here of carbon, it's not a bad idea. The problem is our soil sampling and the variability in the soil and across the landscape that introduces into the system can be very hard to manage, to find trueness or rightness. We'd have to have some really good protocols on that, especially around the sampling of carbon. One of the risks with that approach, which I'm sure they've considered, is how we top up the funding. So it's fine if I'm doing practice A or I have the soil carbon levels A, and I get reduced premiums going into the pool that's going to go out for payouts. If no other institution is covering that reduction of income when there is an insurance payout, it's going to lead to some problems. That's maybe one of the reasons why, instead of looking at that carbon or the soil sample, which is the ultimate litmus test of what's going on, we've often looked at, if you're doing practice A, B, and C, because they know I have benefits, we can monitor the practice easier than the variability of the soil sampling. I can see that thinking going down that row. I see you nodding on the thoughts there. You must have the same thinking.
I mean, rather than mapping the entire section to say, all right, you are doing the thing that increases the soil organic carbon, therefore we assume that your soil organic carbon rates are going up. You don't have to sample the entire section. Do I have time for one more? All right. Well, it's funny, Senator Wu, this is where I thought he was going to go, talking about Alberta and the oil industry. One thing that we've not yet really had a chance to delve into yet with our study is the issue of soil pollution and soil reclamation. In Alberta, of course, where farmers don't own, whoops, is Mr. Wallace frozen? No, he's just thinking. Sorry. In Alberta, farmers often don't own the subsurface mineral rights to their land. Usually they don't. And they don't really have, they don't really have rights if an oil company comes and wants to drill on their farmland. They have rights to compensation, but not rights to say no. And I'm wondering, how big a problem is it to have agricultural land potentially vulnerable to the polluting effects of having resource extraction on the same site? And if your office has looked into issues of soil reclamation after extraction?
It's an excellent question. You're right. The footprint is often small, but it's still very significant. There's been a lot of work in the past on that reclamation of those sites. We've done a lot of work with manures as being a reclamation additive that brings the sites back. Now, legislatively, there is a requirement to do that. There is sampling and testing requirements to bring the sites back up for being reclaimed. I don't think from a farmer's perspective, they feel they're reclaimed as quickly as they could or should be. There's always a funding gap with regard to reclaiming sites. And many sites are actually, they're not abandoned. They're just put on hold because of economics. They may or not be extracting from that site for various periods of time. So there's a lot of things going on. We have done a lot of work. We feel we can do a really good job of reclamation. I think there's a lot of other issues other than soil health that are coming off them that we have to deal with on a regular annual basis, and things like weeds and invasives, et cetera, moving off sites, and movement of pathogens like clubroot, which is a soil-borne pathogen that can move off site. So it's those activities that we need to work more on a regular, everyday basis too.
It's really interesting. I don't think I've ever realized that before. So it's not just a question of the leaching of the petroleum. It's the disruption of the site can bring other contagions and pathogens. So when a well site is abandoned or orphaned, what recourse does the farmer have, especially if it's a small producer who's gone bankrupt?
Yeah, we've got that problem across the province. We've, as a province, put together a large package over the last few years to help address those orphaned wells, with reclamation companies getting the funds to cover those wells where the companies have gone bankrupt and covering them off. And it's just a slow process to get the number that we have through the system. But you've hit the nail on the head that is an ongoing issue that we in Alberta are actively trying to address, or at least in the last few years, with this new initiative.